The American frontier, also known as the Old West and popularly referred to as the Wild West, evokes images of rugged cowboys, endless frontiers, and dramatic showdowns at high noon.
Imagine a time when lawmen and outlaws walked the same dusty streets and every corner held a story of danger, survival, and adventure. The Wild West wasn't just a place of legends, it was real, raw, and filled with moments that were captured on camera but often forgotten in the pages of history. In this video, we will be dusting off the old photo albums to reveal rare and forgotten images of the Wild West that show what life was truly like beyond the Hollywood movies. Wild Bunch. In the dusty streets of Fort Worth, Texas, back in 1900, one single photograph changed everything for a gang of outlaws who thought they were untouchable. That picture, known as the Fort Worth Five, has become one of the most iconic images from the Wild West era. It captured the infamous gang known as the Wild Bunch: Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, Ben Kilpatrick, Will Carver, and Harvey Logan, better known as Kid Curry. In the black and white photo, these men look calm, confident, and dressed to impress. They didn't look like desperate criminals. Instead, they looked like gentlemen, with their stylish suits and relaxed stances. But behind those cool expressions were men who lived by robbing banks and trains. And they were good at it. So good that they were the most wanted men in the West. But here's the twist. They made one fatal mistake. The Wild Bunch had just pulled off a series of successful robberies and felt unstoppable, so they decided to celebrate by getting their picture taken at a local photo studio in Fort Worth. They thought it would be a harmless keepsake, a souvenir of their wild days. But they couldn't have been more wrong. The photo was proudly displayed in the studio's front window for everyone to see. And that's where things started to unravel. A sharp-eyed lawman happened to pass by, and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The faces staring back at him were the same ones plastered on wanted posters across the country. Word got out fast. The Pinkerton Detective Agency, already hot on their trail, wasted no time. They printed copies of that photo and sent them to every sheriff, bounty hunter, and lawman they could find. Before the gang even knew what hit them, they went from feeling invincible to being hunted like animals. That one photograph turned them into targets overnight, triggering one of the biggest manhunts in the history of the Wild West. Still, the Wild Bunch wasn't ready to throw in the towel. They stayed on the move, robbing trains and banks with even more daring than before. For a while, it seemed like no one could catch them, but the Wild West wasn't kind to outlaws. Eventually, things fell apart. One by one, the gang members met their grim fates. Some were gunned down by relentless lawmen who finally caught up to them. Others turned on each other, driven by fear and betrayal when the pressure got too intense. In the end, the Wild Bunch went out not with a quiet surrender, but with guns blazing. That single photograph, what was supposed to be a fun keepsake, ended up sealing their doom. Today, over a century later, people still look at that photo, fascinated by the stories of those outlaws who lived fast, robbed hard, and paid the ultimate price for their life on the run. Slaves being sold. In the heart of Atlanta, 1864, this photograph captures a scene that chills the soul. A slave auction in full swing. Human lives lined up like cattle, bought and sold as if they were mere objects.
Come here, you! The slave auction is over!
Men, women, and even children stand there, eyes filled with sorrow, fear, and a sense of loss too deep to describe. Families ripped apart with the strike of a gavel, their dignity stripped away. An auctioneer's voice echoes, calling out bids like they're pricing livestock, while in the background, a Union soldier stands watch, a silent reminder that even as the Civil War thundered on, this horrific trade persisted. It's a haunting contrast. On one side, the fierce battle for freedom. On the other, the brutal reality of people being sold like goods. The image is a raw glimpse into a time when the ideals of liberty clashed with the cruel reality of bondage. It shows how, despite the war's promises of change, the cruelty of slavery was still in full force. Bessie the Cow. Picture this. 1907, the American Wild West. Tough times, rough folks, dust always blowing around. But in the middle of it all, there's Bessie. Not just any old cow, mind you. This one had a job that wasn't about grazing or pulling a plow. Bessie had a daily routine, and it wasn't what you'd expect. Every morning, 7 kids, rambunctious, laughing, full of mischief, climbed up on her back. No wagons or horses for them. Nope, they rode a cow to school. It wasn't fancy, but they sure felt like explorers every time they hit the trail. Bessie's hooves kicked up dust as they made their way down the path, sun high in the sky and the kids holding on tight. Their journey wasn't quick. It was a slow, steady ride. Bessie wasn't in a hurry, and neither were they. Some days, they probably sang. Other days, maybe they just watched the world roll by, bumping along as Bessie did her thing. It was just another day for them, but it was something special too. No one else could say they rode a cow to school after all. But the Wild West wasn't all happy kids and easy rides. Life could get rough in those parts, dangerous even. Outlaws, harsh weather, and tough work were around every corner. Even with Bessie's charm, the world around them was still wild, still untamed. That was Bessie's world, a little bit of calm in a place full of chaos, where a cow wasn't just a cow, but a steady companion to a bunch of kids who needed to get to school, come what may. The arduous quest for fortune. The year was 1890. In the rough and wild lands of Rockerville, Dakota, this photograph captured a slice of life most folks today can barely imagine. It shows a small group of miners, faces weathered by long days under the harsh sun. These men, known as Old-Timer, Spriggs, Lamb, and Dillon, were hard at work at a placer mining site, digging through earth and mud with nothing but simple tools and a lot of grit. The method they used was called placer mining. It wasn't fancy, but it got the job done. They used sluice boxes, simple wooden channels, to sift through water and gravel, hoping to catch tiny specks of gold. That's how it was back then. You worked with what you had. And these men didn't have much more than their strong hands and the dream of striking it rich. Life wasn't easy for miners like these. They faced long days of back-breaking work, often for little or no reward. But that wasn't all. There were dangers everywhere, harsh weather that could turn a good day into a disaster, diseases that spread through mining camps like wildfire, and the constant fear of being robbed or attacked by bandits. It was a tough life, but for many, it was the only chance they had to change their fortunes. These men came from all corners, drawn by stories of gold hidden beneath the ground. They didn't have much, just their tools, their strength, and the stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd find enough gold to start a new life. Some did, but most walked away with nothing but tired bones and broken dreams. Yet, for a brief moment in time, they were captured in that old photograph. 4 men, side by side, chasing after the same dream. The gold rush days may be long gone, but their story of grit, risk, and hope lives on, frozen in that single shot from 1890. The Bloody Benders. Back in the early 1870s, the Bender family rolled into Labette County, Kansas. At first glance, they seemed like good, honest folk. They weren't flashy, but folks took a liking to them, especially with Katie Bender around. She was the face of the family, charming and bold, claiming to have powers, said she could heal, talk to spirits and all that. People believed her, and soon the family set up a little inn and tavern by the road. It was nothing special, but it gave travelers a place to rest, and locals would gather there to chat, eat, and have a drink. But something wasn't quite right with the Benders. People who stayed at their place started to disappear. At first it was just whispers, the odd rumor. Travelers didn't always stick around, and this was the frontier. Danger lurked everywhere. But as more folks vanished, the townspeople got uneasy. Some blamed the wilderness, but others couldn't shake the feeling something sinister was going on at that little inn. It all came to a head when the brother of one of the missing men decided to take matters into his own hands. He wasn't about to sit around while his kin disappeared, so he gathered a group of rough men, armed and ready, and they rode out to the Bender place to get some answers. What they found would shake the whole county. Out back, hidden in shallow dirt, were the bodies, at least 11 souls, all murdered and stripped of whatever they had on them. Each one had been killed brutally, with no mercy. The Bender family? Gone. Vanished like smoke the night before the vigilantes showed up. They knew their time was up and slipped away before anyone could lay hands on them. Word of the bloody scene spread fast. Papers picked it up, and soon the tale of the Bloody Benders was all anyone could talk about. People couldn't get enough of it. How a family, looking so normal, could be so wicked. Some thought they did it all for money, robbing their guests before killing them. Others believed they were twisted, enjoying the terror and the bloodshed more than the gold. But the real reasons behind what the Benders did, nobody ever found out for sure. There was a massive manhunt, lawmen, bounty hunters, anyone who could hold a gun or sniff out a trail, but they never caught them. Some claimed to have seen the Benders in different parts of the country. Others said they'd fled far, maybe to Europe or South America. It didn't matter though, the family disappeared as quickly as they had shown up, and so the Benders slipped into legend, their crimes a dark stain on the history of the Wild West. Their story, full of greed, violence, and mystery, still haunts the memory of those old frontier days. You couldn't trust anyone out there, not even a smiling family with an inn and a friendly face. Calamity Jane. Calamity Jane and Wild Bill Hickok, two names that carried weight out on the frontier. Hickok, the lawman who made outlaws quiver in their boots, and Calamity Jane, wild and tough as nails, were a pair like no other. Martha Jane Canary, as she was born, wasn't one to scare easily. She fought and rode with the best of them, earning her reputation the hard way. Then came Hickok. He was already a legend, running with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, his name whispered in saloons and streets alike. When Hickok rolled into Deadwood in the summer of 1876, the town buzzed. Gold fever was in the air, but so was Hickok's presence. He was a magnet for trouble, gold hunters, and gamblers. Calamity Jane couldn't keep her eyes off him. She wasn't the swooning type, but something about Wild Bill pulled her in. They were thick as thieves after that. Day by day, as Hickok chased gold and tested his luck at the card tables, Calamity was never far behind. She had his back, riding beside him through thick and thin. Everyone could see they were close, a pair of hardened souls bound by something raw. But things in the Wild West could turn bad quickly. That summer, Hickok's luck ran dry. On a hot day in August, while sitting at a poker table in Deadwood's No. 10 saloon, an outlaw named Jack McCall shot him dead from behind. One bullet and it was over. Wild Bill was gone.
Jack McCall is a drunk. McCall comes in, and before Hickok knows it, takes his gun and shoots him in the back of the head. Hickok, face down, on the table, and is dead.
Calamity Jane was wrecked. Her world, the one with Hickok in it, came crashing down. After his death, she couldn't stay away from his grave. She visited it over and over, drawn to the spot like a moth to flame. There's even a photo from 1903 that shows her standing there, looking lost, as if still holding on to something long gone. Was it love? Some say she was smitten, head over heels for the gunman who'd stolen her heart. Others think it was more complicated. Maybe it was loyalty or the bond of two people who lived fast and hard. No one knows for sure. What's clear is that Calamity Jane and Wild Bill's story became one of the West's most talked about legends, stirring up rumors and tales of their meeting and whatever love might have bloomed in 1876. The Black Jack. The day was April 26, 1901, and Thomas Edward Ketchum, better known as Black Jack, was staring death straight in the face. He was standing on the scaffold in Clayton, New Mexico, his eyes cold, his jaw set. There was no turning back now. The law had finally caught up with him. Born in 1863, Black Jack had lived the outlaw life, robbing trains and chasing thrills. He wasn't the type to shy away from danger, and for years, he'd outrun the law, always one step ahead. Big man too, 6 feet tall, strong as an ox, weighing in at 180 pounds. Folks feared him, and rightfully so. Black Jack was ruthless, with a reputation that spread far and wide. He'd take what he wanted, and if you stood in his way, he'd make sure you regretted it. But no outlaw rides forever. His time had come. The law finally nailed him, and now here he was, standing on the gallows, sentenced to hang for his crimes. The whole town had come out to see it. They wanted to watch the man who had terrorized the rails meet his maker. Someone snapped a photograph just before the end. It shows Black Jack standing tall, staring ahead like a man who knows there's no way out. He wasn't begging for mercy. No, Black Jack faced death like he'd faced everything else, head on, without flinching. But then, fate had one last cruel twist. The hanging was botched, horribly so. When they pulled the lever, the rope snapped tight, but something went wrong. The force was too much, and instead of a clean death, Black Jack was decapitated by the drop. It was a gruesome scene, blood spilling onto the ground, and the crowd that had gathered for a show got more than they bargained for. The Kid Playing Card Game. In 1877, a rare photograph freezes a moment in time. Billy the Kid, the infamous outlaw, sits at a table, deep in a card game. It's a scene that could be mistaken for ordinary, but there's tension in the air. Billy's wearing a clean white shirt, a dark vest, and a top hat. He looks young, but his eyes are sharp, locked on the cards he's holding. Around the table sit his gang members, just as focused. They're not laughing, not joking, each one is playing to win. The bottle of liquor is nearly empty, proof they've been at it for hours, maybe all night. There's no easy way out in these kinds of games. The stakes? Probably more than just money. In the West, everything's a gamble. Your life, your next meal, the law right around the corner. For all their fame as killers and thieves, they're just men in this moment. Men chasing a break from the dusty, dangerous world they live in. But don't forget who they are. Billy the Kid isn't just some kid at a card game. He's already got a name, one soaked in blood and stories. The gun on his hip speaks louder than the cards in his hand. This photo shows a slice of life that won't last. the camaraderie, the shared bottle, it's all fleeting. Soon enough, they'll be back on the run, dodging the law and looking for the next score. In the Wild West, the line between survival and death is thin. Billy and his crew knew that better than anyone. Olive Oatman. Olive Oatman was just a girl, 14 years old, when her life was ripped apart. She and her sister Mary were taken by the Yavapai, a Native American tribe, and dragged on foot for miles, anywhere from 60 to 100, through harsh terrain. The journey was only the start of their nightmare. Once they reached the Yavapai village, the girls were forced into hard labor. They had to gather food, haul firewood, and if they didn't move fast enough, they were beaten. Their days were long, their nights worse, and they had no way out. A year passed, and then the sisters were sold off like property. In exchange for 2 horses, the Yavapai handed them over to the Mojave, a different tribe. Life with the Mojave was different, better even. The Mojave weren't as harsh as the Yavapai, and for a moment it seemed like Olive and Mary might finally catch a break. But then came the drought. The land dried up, food became scarce, and water was harder to come by. It hit the Mojave hard between 1855 and 1856, and Olive and Mary suffered right alongside them. Hunger gnawed at everyone. Mary, weak and worn down, couldn't make it. She starved to death, leaving Olive alone. Now, Olive had to survive without her sister, facing the Mojave struggles on her own. Her story wasn't just one of capture, it was one of survival, endurance, and loss in a world that seemed determined to break her at every turn. Poker Alice. In the rowdy saloons of the Wild West, poker wasn't just a card game, it was a way to survive, to make a name for yourself, or to lose everything in one wild night. And in this world of whiskey, cigar smoke, and risky bets, one player stood out among the rest. Her name was Alice Ivers, but everyone knew her as Poker Alice. Alice wasn't your typical gambler. She was born far from the dusty towns of the American frontier, in England in 1853. But fate brought her to the United States when she was still young, and it wasn't long before she found herself caught up in the world of poker. It all started when she married her first husband, a gambler who taught her the ins and outs of the game. Alice learned fast. In fact, she became even better than him. Tragedy struck when her husband died suddenly, leaving Alice alone. But instead of giving up, she decided to put her poker skills to use. She hit the poker tables, and it didn't take long for folks to start talking about this woman who could bluff better than any man in the room. She made a name for herself in no time, and people came from all around just to watch her play. What made Poker Alice such a legend wasn't just her skill with the cards, it was the way she could read people. She knew how to spot a lie, how to catch the smallest twitch that might give away a player's hand. At the poker table, her face was like stone. No one could tell if she was holding a full house or a busted hand. But outside of that serious look, she had a wild side. Alice would show up in fancy gowns, dripping in jewelry, flaunting her winnings. She wasn't afraid to stand out. There's a story that says, one night, Alice walked into a saloon, sat down, and walked away with over $250,000 in winnings. That's enough money to make anyone a legend, but it wasn't just her card skills that people remembered, it was her sharp tongue. She was known to throw off her opponents with a sarcastic comment or a quick joke. One of her favorite sayings was, "Praise the Lord and place your bets," and it became a saying folks would repeat long after she left the table. But life wasn't all glitz and glory for Poker Alice. She was married 3 times, and strangely, each of her husbands died under mysterious circumstances. It didn't take long for whispers to spread. Was it just bad luck, or did Alice have a darker side? No one ever proved anything, but the rumors only added to her legend. Rodeos. You can't talk about the Wild West without mentioning the thrill of the rodeo, a place where cowboys, cowgirls, and wild animals put on one heck of a show. The rodeo was where the spirit of the West came alive, and it wasn't just about the riders and the bulls, it was a whole experience. Picture a hot, dusty arena under the wide open California sky. Folks from every corner gathered together, families with kids, groups of friends, and curious newcomers looking for excitement. The smell of popcorn mixed with the dust, laughter filled the air, and the crowd buzzed with excitement, all eyes on the action about to unfold. But then, the real showstopper steps in. A fearless woman with wild hair flowing behind her takes center stage. She's riding a beautiful horse, their bond clear from the way they move as one. They race toward a shiny convertible parked at the far end of the arena. The tension builds, everyone holds their breath. In a split second, horse and rider take off, soaring over the car in one smooth, breathtaking leap. The crowd loses it. People jump to their feet, clapping, cheering, and shouting as the arena fills with pure energy. That jump wasn't just a stunt, it was a moment of raw courage and skill, a glimpse into what made the Wild West so legendary. It was about living for the thrill, chasing that rush, and reaching for something bigger than yourself. For that moment, under the California sky, everyone felt a piece of that wild, untamed spirit. Annie Oakley. The Wild West is often painted as a man's world, full of rugged cowboys, outlaws, and tough-as-nails lawmen, but that's just one side of the story. In truth, women played just as big a role in shaping the frontier, even if they didn't always get the credit. And these women weren't all homemakers or school teachers. Some were sharpshooters, some were outlaws, and some defied every expectation of what a woman should be back then. Take Annie Oakley, for example. She didn't just break the mold, she shattered it. Born Phoebe Ann Mosey in Ohio in 1860, she learned to handle a gun early on. By her teens, she was already known as one of the best shots around. She eventually met sharpshooter Frank Butler, who became her husband and manager. Together, they joined Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, dazzling crowds across the country with her jaw-dropping shooting tricks. Annie could hit the edge of a playing card from 30 paces or shoot a coin tossed into the air. But it wasn't just about the show. She became a symbol of strength and independence for women, proving they could be just as fearless and skilled as any man. The Widowmaker. In the late 1800s, Delmar, Nevada, was a town on the rise. Set right in the heart of gold country, it attracted settlers looking to make their fortune. With a population of about 1,500, it had everything a bustling town needed: shops, schools, and even a hospital. Folks thought they'd struck gold, both literally and figuratively. But when a new gold refinery came to town in 1893, things took a dark turn, and Delmar would earn a grim nickname: the Widowmaker. The refinery spewed out thick clouds of silicon dust, fine, deadly particles that hung in the air and crept into people's lungs. Miners who worked hard to pull wealth from the earth were slowly being poisoned by the very ground they dug. It didn't take long before men started coughing up blood, their breaths getting shorter, their strength fading. Wives watched as their husbands withered away, leaving them alone with children to feed and bills to pay. At the peak of the crisis, Delmar was filled with grieving families, 400 widows to be exact. For 16 years, the dust kept flowing, even as more and more men fell to it. The refinery finally shut down, but it was too little, too late. The damage was done. The town that once buzzed with hope slowly emptied out. Widows and their children packed up what they could and left, searching for a fresh start somewhere far from the toxic dust that had taken everything from them. By 1934, Delmar was nothing more than a ghost town. The wind howled through its empty streets, a chilling echo of the lives lost and families torn apart. All that remained were abandoned buildings and whispers of the price paid for chasing gold at any cost. The lesson was clear: progress without care for people's lives leaves nothing but ghosts behind. The Deadwood Stagecoach. The Deadwood Stagecoach wasn't just a ride, it was the pulse of the Old West. It rumbled through dusty trails, connecting boomtowns and hauling treasures like gold and silver. With all that loot packed inside, it was a rolling target for outlaws eager to strike it rich. But don't be fooled by its simple, weather-beaten look. This was no ordinary carriage. It was a fortress on wheels, ready for battle. Each coach had a crew that was tough as nails, drivers who knew the land like the back of their hand, and guards armed to the teeth. They weren't just carrying mail or passengers, they were defending fortunes. Every trip was a nerve-wracking ride through rugged territory where danger lurked at every twist and turn. Bandits crouched in the shadows, waiting to spring their ambushes. When they did, gunfire would erupt, turning the dusty roads into battlegrounds. The stagecoach rides were more than just journeys. They were wild adventures where life and death hung in the balance. Those who rode it were chasing more than just gold. They were living on the edge, fueled by the thrill of the chase and the fight to survive. As the dust settles on the tales of the Old West, it's clear that these stories of grit and danger were more than just history. They were the heartbeat of a time when fortune favored the bold and survival demanded every ounce of strength.